So basically, there's a few things that I noticed, and then we're gonna go back to Motec and answer some questions, I guess, and go through the entire lap, I guess. But I did a little bit of analysis, and there's a couple things that stood out to me that I learned, and I wanted to go over with you. This is not from your data. This is actually from mine, but it's an example of some odd thing. And this is at the early, like the first early laps that I did, where the gearing was completely terrible, and I was also going off of the gears that I don't generally like using first gear that much. And in real life, I saw like the real life lap, they didn't use first gear at this track. It wasn't a Ford, but usually in real life, they avoid using first gear. It's not that often used, but there are racetracks where you use first gear. So anyway, I was in second gear. This is coming out of the Oak Tree turn. And this is a case where it's not definitive that it's turbo lag, because you saw that the horsepower curve on iRacing is very smooth anyway. In real life, which is typical, like all the curves on iRacing are always going to be very nice and smooth little curves. But in real life, especially for a turbo car, they're quite different usually, where like they have some flat sections and then it rapidly goes up, and then it has a flat and then it goes down like very quickly. It's not as smooth as ours. And obviously in real life you have turbo lag. Here's a case where I would go to full throttle, and you can see like where I have the line lined up, I'm at full throttle, but I've had stages basically here of acceleration. This is my longitudinal G. And normally I could see when we were getting out of slow corners, like you should be hitting 0.6 or 0.7 G. But I'm basically flat open right now, and the engine is struggling. Like this is a case where it's like, and then it revs up. And I was noting, but basically the issue here is that my minimum RPM, but when I go to throttle, was about 3,700 RPM. And I go full throttle, and just the engine is flat, no power, no power, no power, and then finally, bam! And then you see all of a sudden at this point, which is about 900, well, maybe like 400 meters later. I don't know what. Got to find out what the distance is. But several meters later, then it finally, bam, ramps up, and then it hits the 0.7 G of maximum acceleration. So then from that, and checking the rest of the corners and everything, like I see that, just as a baseline for this car, like you can't let your RPM get lower than around 4,300 without it affecting your acceleration out of the corner. So that suggests cases where you have to change your gearing or use a different gear or something like that. But we have the option for gearing changes. So I could make it where I could use second gear and make this effective, and the second I go to full throttle, be at 0.7 G. Because this is a massive time loss when you compare it to somebody else that's not messing it up. Now I started using first gear here, and that's all right in iRacing. In iRacing, it never penalizes you for using first gear. In real life, some race cars don't like it, and some race cars make it impossible to use first gear. Like you wouldn't be able to use first gear as a raceable gear in the Skip Barber car. Like real life wouldn't let you do that, but some cars just have, the transmission is extremely difficult, especially at sequential transmission. You can't get it into first gear. It's really hard. You wouldn't be able to race that. Yeah. Yeah, it won't shift into it very nicely. It's very ugly, and if you had to use that consistently, it would cause a lot of issues. You'd mess it up a lot. So that's not good. So that's just a quick example. You didn't do it, but I think that's good reference for you to have. First gear is for getting out of the pits. That's what it's for usually. Okay, so then this one is about brake application, and also this is not you. This is a different case, and this is an example of something bad, but it leads me to your braking style. So basically, this is a case where you see here, I'm showing the brake position, and this is brake pressure, and this is probably from an Audi R8, but you see the line accelerating where the braking is being applied so quickly, and we're right at this point with the blue line, we're at maximum brake pressure. This is maximum brake position. But you'll notice that the G, which is the orange line here, the longitudinal G, is still increasing. It's not at its maximum yet. This point right here ahead of it is the maximum longitudinal G. This is a case where the braking pressure has gotten ahead of the braking G, right? It's gotten there before the maximum. This is a classic case where this leads to an instantaneous brake lockup because you haven't completed the weight transfer. The longitudinal G hitting its peak is a sign of the fact that now you have the most grip on the front tires that you're gonna get. And right now, before it, like you don't have it. Right now, it's, let's say if it was nearly half of what the final G is gonna be, 2.5. Right now we're at 1.5, so it's not half. But if it was half, you could say that you have half the grip that you're gonna have in the front tires in about another moment. This is bad braking technique because you're getting ahead of the weight transfer. Basically, you're asking the brake pressure to be something that it doesn't have the grip for yet. It will, but it's a timing thing. So the ABS obviously instantly goes on and it catches it, and there's no issue. But this is bad braking technique. As long as you have ABS, you're okay. But without it, terrible, because this is a case where it leads to instant brake lockup. But then there's two options: either the driver catches the brake lockup and releases brake pressure, which you don't really need to do, because once the car finally finishes the weight transfer and the moment now is in a case where now you have the full grip that you needed, usually the wheels start rotating again. So it's one of those cases where the brakes lock up instantly, and then the wheels rotate, and then everything's okay. But sometimes you release the brake pressure, and now you're at a brake pressure where it's too low, and you're not braking at optimal anymore. Now you're below the limit. And I want you to see the notice that I have something called brake application speed. There's two values here: maximum and average. So the maximum is the maximum in a braking event. Like here, it just looks at this braking event. What was the maximum number? And then the average is for any kind of positive brake, because sometimes here there are positive values. It'll just average everything out. So the maximum was 400% per second. So it gives you an idea of how quickly it spikes up. So that's bad, and that's ABS stuff, right? Here is a different example, also not your driving style, but this is a case of a car without ABS, and you can see that here at this point of maximum brake pressure is also the exact same point as maximum G. So this is not getting ahead of it. This is just being quick, but still not before the weight transfer is there. And you can see here's the front wheel speeds. Before, you can see the front wheel speeds don't, the ABS is on top of it, so it doesn't really allow for any brake lockup. But here you can see that yes, there's no brake lockup, but still an awful lot of brake pressure, more than the other one, and no brake lockup. But the thing is that the timing of it, you see maximum brake pressure, maximum G, everything is in line and everything's good. Here the braking speed is 230% per second, so it's about half of what this was. So then that gets me to where you're braking, and the issue is this phase right here is a little bit suboptimal. There's a little bit of a, like, you can, I guess I want to ask like how you develop your braking style, because there's a reason why this would be developed over time. Sometimes when you're too spiky, like the other one, it comes from somebody that has driven open wheels for too much, something that has very stiff suspension and something that weight transfers very quickly. But the softer the suspension, the longer it takes. It requires to apply the brakes much smoother. And this is very, very smooth, your braking style. But so how was it developed? Yeah, it's hard for me to want to tell anybody that, there's nothing wrong with braking styles, and at the end of the day, if whatever is the fastest for you is always the best thing to do. Like in this example, this is us going into turn one, and the reason why, like here, like it's possible to have shortened up the braking distance a little bit, because yes, there's a little bit of a hole here where neither car locked up, with on the black line in the reference line, there's no brake lock up there either. So clearly the limit of tire grip, there's still more that can be asked from in this part. So that you can't see it here, but the black line is decelerating much faster. So yes, right now you're carrying more speed into the corner, but then the issue is that when we get to about here, you're still applying a lot more brake because you're still carrying a little bit too much speed, I suppose. And then obviously that leads to an issue because now the car's loaded up. Now you have weight on the left side tires. Now you've already started your turn in. Your turn in point is about here. So you're deep into the turn in and then carrying too much brake at that point. So then your inside wheel locks up massively. So you have the inside wheel locking up, too much brake, and then you're forced to very rapidly trail off the brake here. This is a little bit too much brake to have, and it should be a little bit smoother on the thing. So generally, I see a lot of the time that with your braking, that this part is a little bit too gentle and a little bit too smooth, and then the opposite side is a little bit too smooth as well, where it should be more. It should be pulled where you can brake a little bit harder at the beginning. Not exactly like that, but this should be a little bit more it should take a little bit longer, and this should be a little bit lower. Just a little bit lower, about half as much brake pressure as what you have, and carrying it on for longer, and that's a little bit better of a trail brake because you see how this goes down really quickly. This last bit of braking, that angle is a little bit too sharp. Like it should be a little bit flatter, should be a little bit smoother. So the smoothness on the release is also something that can be improved a little bit. And generally your braking looks kind of like symmetric in a lot of places. And if you can try to work on making a little bit more asymmetric, where you bias and brake a little bit more on the starting phase and brake a little bit more smoothly on the release, I think maybe that should help a little bit in some corners, especially for turn one, because I've seen that you've been kind of struggling in turn one. So yeah, I mean, it's a good starting point, but at the end after doing enough laps, then you have to use your own because it's just a good starting point for the first session going out. Yeah, I saw that for that turn after the long straightaway, after the oak tree turn, the one marker is what he brakes at, but we can actually go way deeper into it. You can go to last little sign that has an arrow, or dial it back a little bit. But now I'm basically braking at the arrow. So this is turn one, and this is a comparison of 2 of your laps, and this is still, I guess, when you were doing it early. But obviously, what I wanted to point out here is that here's that characteristic dip in the total G, the orange one, where when you brake too early, like in this case where it's too early, you end up in a case where now you're letting off of the brake, so you're releasing the brake, so now you're losing the front G, you're losing potential there, and you're turning, and you're not ready to turn in yet. So you're releasing brake G, but you're still holding the steering wheel sort of straight, and then so now there's a gap between your turn-in point and when you're already at the turn-in speed. You're releasing the brake because you're at turn-in speed. So the car's speed is ready to turn in, but you're not physically there yet. So then that causes this dip. So that's a hint when you're not at the limit, and you can see it in the friction circle here as well. So you can see the blue line. We're way off of the limit. This is obviously when we were experimenting. But obviously neither one had any brake lockup. The brake pressure was fine. Again, the brake release also kind of abrupt, but you weren't ready to turn in, so there's no need to really do too much of a trail brake. But I'm pretty sure that you also understeered through this corner. When there's a whole host of problems that happen when you brake too early for a corner that people don't consider. But now you don't have any trail brake on. This is around the entry phase, so probably understeering massively, which probably causes you to get on the throttle late, and so on. Yeah, and part of that I think we have to find through setup, but then just being ultra smooth. Talk to me what you feel like. What does the track do when you're going into turn one? Like this is one of your. This is the best time that I guess we have recorded. So this is definitely a good example. Good brake pressure. Your application here was a little bit faster. This is the time that that you sent me more recently, right? So brake application speed a little bit higher than you normally get, and I'm usually on the brake application speed around the 200, and you're at 181, so that's a little bit better. But then my average brake application speed, which is kind of like a different number that it averages, is usually way lower than yours. So that also points to, and then the brake release smoothness. You've had smoother numbers, but the average is the most important one. And this part is still kind of very abrupt on the release part, and that's going to be making your situation worse. This snapping, because your brake release here is abrupt. So I would imagine that maybe if we look at your steering, let's see if there was any moment. Your steering here was fine, so you didn't have to catch any moments. Luckily, much more confident. I guess if you do this with reason, it's okay, but it probably did lead, and I can see with another plot that the massive understeer, or like in the mid corner here. So obviously you're purposely inducing understeer into the car on your entry by snapping off of the brakes like that, but you're doing it on purpose. The other thing, if you notice, and I'm pretty sure, like this is actually advantageous the way that you're braking, because if you're braking around the 3 marker, you'll notice that the track is actually going downhill at first. So obviously, when you're going downhill, you have to apply less brake, and then it starts going uphill again. So your braking style, like in this corner right here, is actually more perfect and more optimal than others would be, because of the fact that you have to modulate it otherwise. Because here right now you still don't have the full braking potential because you're going downhill, and then here, starting around here, you're going uphill again. So now you have more braking potential, and your braking pressure is higher than it was in the earlier laps. And I can see in your G, here your G total, it's much better. Here we start coming off of it. So up to this point, the only thing is that you could have carried your braking a little bit higher, a little bit longer. So up to around here, you could have still carried the same brake pressure. So it's a little bit, maybe premature, the release, but that's fine. That's not a case of losing, very much at all. And here you come off of it on purpose. But definitely I see that turn 1 is a place where you're struggling the most. I have had the same thing where it does a little go-kart type thing, the car, and the back slides a little bit, and I don't like it. The way I've been countering it is just actually trying to make sure that I get all my braking done in a straight line, and then very, very gently and carefully, smoothly trail braking and carrying the brake into the corner there. But I've just been focusing on making sure that my initial braking phase, that I'm getting all of it in, and I'm slowing down the car without needing excessive brake on the entry. So I guess I'm carrying, very little at that point. But I am trail braking into the corner, pretty deep into the corner, but I'm just holding very little brake. And it's just trying to be smooth. I'm just trying to combat it by being smoother and smoother with how much brake I'm holding. But yeah, it does snap, and it does that sometimes, and you lose the lap there. But different ways to go about it. But then sometimes I notice that then that causes you to get on the throttle a little bit later than what could be possible. Just a little bit, get the nose turned around and start going the other way. We have to play around. Like I noticed that the VRS setup had a different setting on it, right? Yeah, unfortunately, I can't give too much of an answer as to what is the right amount, because I haven't driven the car enough. But yeah, you can feel when it goes overboard for sure. Like I'm okay with a little bit of and that's all right. But sometimes, especially that stability version of it, the traction control 2, that one is the one that really feels like it kills the speed to me. I don't know exactly what I'm feeling there, but sometimes in one of the setups that I drove, one of the combinations, yeah, it just felt like it was killing the speed. Your throttle is good though. You do a good job of usually getting on the throttle really early, and also the brake application speed is really good and strong. You don't play around with the throttle very much. It's kind of like you go off throttle and on throttle. Like I'm trying to work and trying to show you ways that you can identify without comparing yourself to anybody when you're on the limit and when there's still some improvement that can be made. And usually I look at the total G and I look at this plot here and I can see, is it a case where I'm on the limit or not? And you can see, well, here it's perfectly normal because you also have to consider the racetrack. Here, you're going to have more G braking at one point, but then the track is also going uphill, so then the potential changes. But right here, there's a little bit of this is unnecessary bit right here where it still could have been much lower, and this, the curvature here could have started down here. So you can see that there's a little bit of a hole here that's not being exploited, and that comes from right here. The brakes still should have been on much harder up until like about here, and they weren't. So then that's a little bit of a lost potential. That maybe is a difference where if you slow down the car more early, then you don't have to release so abruptly, or you can carry just a little bit, or do the same thing and just be on the brakes a few meters later, and then that still equates more speed. And then do the exact same braking, but if you carry this just a little bit deeper and then still do your quick release of the brakes and induce that understeer, maybe you'll still be a little bit faster, just a little bit of time gain there. But the braking into turn one is what's making you struggle. After that, you know what you're doing. These corners you're actually doing really well. You're attacking them pretty nicely. The throttle use is very good, very smooth, and then I also like what you can recognize here. The release is very smooth. You're doing a good job of carrying the speed. Like in cases like this where you're going from one corner to another, it's very difficult to. Sometimes it's very easy for somebody, like if you look at your speed trace, to have very quick dips in there. But for you, we're going through these corners, and what I see is that your minimum here is very smooth. Like it's not a spike; it's just a very nice little curve here, and then you're increasing your speed every single corner, very nice and smoothly increasing the speed. That's showing much better technique than somebody that were like a novice. You would see a lot of dips in their corner, but like the bottom, your minimum speeds are very smooth, like a very open radius, and that shows that you're carrying good apex speed, and not doing a thing where you're like over slowing the car and then getting on the throttle really hard, and then that causes like a very spiky shape. So that's very good use of the throttle. But you're being very smooth. You're often on the throttle only once. You're not causing a lot of basically the car rocking back and forth. That's what that would end up doing. What we can see, like here, like your G's and everything are as good as they need to be. So you can't really find any holes here in the game. Obviously through the S's. I also like the way that you were lifting for that final S. Right here, yeah. So you're not really fully releasing the throttle completely. You're turning in. You're carrying a lot of speed. You don't lose that much speed through the lift here, and then finally we go on the brakes. But this little bit is actually very smooth as well. So there's no. I can see again in the friction circle how that looks, and there's not anything that can be gained there in your driving. Yeah. No, absolutely. That's the whole purpose of the lift, is just so that you can have the right position on the race car for this turn. So that's why you have to lift. If you don't, like that corner by itself, if this corner didn't exist, then yes, it would be easy flat. And when I started running the track, like our first sessions and everything, yeah, I can do it flat out, no problem. But then I'm completely out of position for the next corner. So the other thing I did see though is that at least we can hit the curb, and there's a very quick. You get a 1x off for just touching the grass there. So that's another sign that they really don't want you to cut that corner, but you can abuse the curb there. So let's see. I mean, I can't get close enough to see this where you're lifting, but yeah, the resolution sucks. But your line is very good. Like this must have been like really close to being on top of the curb, and and then I guess in the preceding corner, this one right here, we can talk about setup stuff, but I think this is a case where compromise comes in, because I noticed, especially even with the VRS setup, I mean, I don't like the way that the car feels like that. It's a very fast corner. We're going minimum speed seems to be 180 kilometers per hour, so very aerodynamically dependent. Um, and I feel like a lot of understeers there, especially when I get a throttle and everything. So I feel like I have to wait longer. Like you could do, there's things that we could do to the setup that would help this corner, and you would fly through there. But the problem is that there's not that much to be gained. You know, like this corner is nowhere near as important as this slow little corner, because what are you going to gain here? Like you maybe lose a few more kilometers per hour, and then you carry just a little bit more speed for another second and a half maybe, and then you're already into the brake zone. So it's a nice corner and it's a lot of fun to drive, but unfortunately it's low priority. And to me, it doesn't feel that good. Like it's frustrating because I could make the car feel better in that corner, but it would sacrifice this corner here, and then yeah, then that would actually hurt my lap just so I could feel better in one corner, unfortunately. But so anyway, carrying on. Obviously, just immediately looking at the friction circle, you can see that that looks very nice. That looks very good. So you can't pinpoint. The braking here is kind of funky, so it's hard to immediately say, oh man, like this should be this way or not. You're doing a very good job carrying speed through here. I don't know. Your minimum speed is also again like you do have a good ability of making a very slow, very smooth minimum speed and very smoothly getting out of the corners. Again, you're not doing any like little spikes here where like the speed comes very sharp and then there's a clear point of like and then like a sharp point and then it starts going up again, which is very typical, and sometimes you can be very fast doing that, but this is just a little bit more pro, which is just having a very smooth transition from deceleration to acceleration. And really that's what it's about, and that's actually more important. Like it doesn't matter. I would rather see this than seeing a much smoother braking, which you can have braking that's incredibly smooth, and you'd be like, oh wow, that's picture perfect, and then have a very sharp inflection point here, and then it starts accelerating and overslowing basically, things like that. Still though, this is actually a better case where right here, this type of dip here is just, it's hard to tell if it's in the total G, if it has anything to do at all with braking too early or not, because it really seems like you're really on the limit, and it's just more, the car, and the steering, just the typical bouncing around, because no matter what, this graph is always, oscillating up and down. So this is not so much of a dip. So I would say that it's very hard for me to point out, what an obvious thing that you could do driving style into this corner. Like you're doing a really good job. And then let me see your steering. So okay, so here the road is kind of like curving in. So you start pointing in the car, which is fine. Then you kind of straightened it out a bit. Now you do your real turn in, and this is good. So then you relax the steering a little bit, and then wait for the second turn in, and that's really good. In some corners, I saw that you were doing putting a lot more steering input than I was, and that was me learning something actually. Then I started copying that because I was still struggling, and I don't have a lot of experience with the car, so I don't know what it can take. And I felt very, I guess I didn't want to turn it in more, or turn stern to wheel more, because I didn't feel like I could handle it, but it actually could. But in this corner, not so much. The steering angle is fine. So you're talking about positive caster, right? Yeah, I remember, especially in NASCAR, back in NASCAR Racing 2003, the setups were basically almost derived around very, very high negative caster, and people were pushing the caster backwards. And yeah, like it helped the car turn, it made it massively loose. And there were two things that you could do. Like NASCAR setups back then were all about two things: how much rear weight you could handle, because you could shift ballast. So how much weight could you put it to the back? And depending on how much you could is basically your speed, and also your handling abilities, I guess, and then also the negative caster, which the fastest guy with the fastest setup, and they would actually share it. Yeah, most people could never drive that setup anyway, so it didn't matter. The guy would share his setup because nobody could use it, and the two things that you would have to change to bring it back to like normal people to drive it were just move the weight forward and move the caster forward just a little bit, and then it would become manageable to other people. But the weight and the caster, everything else, it's not like that. That's all you needed to do. Okay, just give me a second because I have to go wake up my wife. Okay, so basically, I wanted to wrap up a little bit of the braking analysis. A couple of things I noticed going through the laps of the week, I guess the ones that you've been sending me, and I can see that as you gain confidence in the track and the more laps that you put in, that your braking rate, the braking application speed is increasing. So this is actually more, I guess, of a thing of like confidence or whatever, because early on, like your braking and your initial braking phase was way more gentle. But this is an example. Now we're heading into the turn after the oak tree turn. Where's my map? So this is going into turn 13, and yeah, so this is getting much better. The number on this, I guess, was 150% per second, but still pretty good. Visually, I can see it looks much better. The brake release still, I think it could be a little bit smoother, so you can see if there's anything that you could, maybe try to smooth out a little bit more. But the brake application is getting better. Here on this plot that I have here, you see how I always have the orange and the pink. So the pink is just the longitudinal G, and the orange one is the total G. And when they diverge away from each other, that's where you can see that the other G that's coming in, because this is adding the longitudinal plus the lateral. So when they diverge, and like here they're together, so that means that there is no lateral G. The car's going straight, and it's not even because actually we're curving. So there's a little bit of lateral G coming in, and then you see that they go away from each other. So then you can see as they go away from each other, that's the lateral G coming in and the longitudinal G going away. So that's where I kind of put them together just so that I can identify the transition point. So you can see here, you're coming off of the brake and you're turning in. This is, the car's starting to turn in, and now you're really cranking on the steering wheel, and now you're at full lateral G and still holding, decelerating because you're off throttle. So the car's still going down, so you still have a little bit of a negative longitudinal G. And then you turn in again, and then I guess no. Now we're braking again, but the car's kind of going straight at this point. So then you're not turning as much, and then you start turning again, and then we're gonna go start accelerating. So that's why I have it that way. But then here you'll see when you see things like this, and you've driven the track, but this is something for somebody that maybe is not the driver and the analyst, that you see that they're not on top of each other. And the reason for this is because we recall that this corner is highly angled. There's a lot of banking uphill towards it, and then you're also it has cambering and everything. And when you have that, it kind of screws always with the G calculations, because certain G's are higher than they ought to be or whatever. So here they're not perfectly on top of each other. The car's also turning a little bit, but this is more has to do with the track and the way that it goes. And when you have uphills and downhills and camber on the track, that it always messes up the G. So that's just an example of what that is. Your last sector was actually really good too, and the last sector is where I'm struggling. Well, okay, well you're doing much better than I am. That's the only comparison. But what we want to do is learn how to analyze ourselves, I guess, and see what we can do better. What gear are you going through here, I wonder? So second gear through this one. Yeah, but what dip are you talking about? Not at the same racetrack, but they're very similar in style, where it's very high speed, left, right, and especially on the entry, like you kind of like point it in, and I've driven, the Miata and stuff like that, but it's like they tell you just a stab of the brakes, quick, the fastest downshift that you can do, and then you crank the wheel and then like it'll bite, and then as soon as you finish turning in, full throttle. that's things like that, and it works. But if you try to be smoother through it or whatever, you just waste time. But cranking the wheel into it sometimes is the right way. Let's see, like this is probably beforehand because here you're turning in very gently. Just, at this corner, first you're going downhill and then uphill again. It just happens that this is a little bit more optimal because you can't be at maximum brake pressure so early because you're going downhill. But then by the time that you start going uphill, that's about the time that you're getting to your maximum brake pressure anyway. So it's actually a little bit more perfect, coincidentally, that your brake application is so gentle. Yeah, well, the brake release is nicer here on this one. Again, I mean, I don't know. It's you don't have any brake lockup in any way. It's up to you as long as you're getting the speed out of it. But then you just have to keep on looking at the friction circle and look at your total G and see what if there's a way for you to get better, higher G's than not. Like these are kind of weird little corners because breaking deep into them or anything like that doesn't really gain you too much. So obviously carrying speed are more important. Getting on the throttle is more important. Being in the right position because obviously one of them is a technical one where you go left, but then you have to kind of stay left a little bit before you can go right. So all those things outweigh braking technique into these corners. Yeah, that's the one. Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's something that can be worked on with a setup, which kind of like leads me to let's talk about damping and let's talk about. So you had sent me your setup and I started using it, and then I saw your data, and I was trying to look at your data and and see the changes that you were making to it. And I guess I need to kind of like screen share back with you because then later we went to like the VRS setup and that's not um, good. Obviously, what we saw where it's what we saw was that it's trying to here it is. It's super extending the damper and I would imagine that the real life engineers on that car would be very worried if they saw that in real life. I think you'd end up breaking the damper. I don't think that that's the way it's supposed to work. Can you see my screen? Okay, so this is from like the first batch of laps that you sent me, and in it there's a setup change, right? And I kind of have this backwards because first I thought that that the setup was negative numbers how it used to be. So a smaller number meant more damping, but I guess it's completely backwards. So this is, in fact, I need to be able to edit this. It won't let me. So I made these notes based on the wrong information. So in this case, you went from 3 to 6, so that's adding 3 clicks. So everything's backwards. So then you added more damping in the front. You took away damping, so I have to kind of like rethink of this. But I kind of feel like you were going off in the wrong direction, and then I did a few more laps, and then started playing around with the dampers myself, and it's possible. Like I don't know, I was getting happier with seeing the average velocities going lower. Like I was able to easily get them down to like 33, 34 millimeters per second, and also a little bit better geometry. But like here you have 6 and 7, 3 and 3. That's fine. Then it became 6 and 6, 5, 5, 8. That didn't change. 8, 6. So basically, I notice 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 6. In one of the setups that we kind of had a case where there was more damping in the rebound that there was on the compression on the front of the car, but then in the rear it was kind of backwards where you had more rebound than compression, and also or not in the front of the car. I mean, like you had more compression on the fast side, there was some kind of asymmetry with the numbers that I had seen, which was with a different batch, I guess. And the issue was that it was actually like skewing the data. So here, like in the case of the channels, like the symmetry on the red line, the original damping, which was like on the front here. So it was 3 and 8. So 3, this is low speed. 8 on the fast high speed compression, and 3 on the low speed, and 8 on the high speed. So that's what it was. Like it was a lot better balanced and everything as far as compression to rebound. And then you made a change, and then that ended up blunting the nose and skewing it towards rebound. And I guess I would, now this is so far back that you probably don't remember what was driving the change. I told you before that it was okay. It was okay to mess with this once the damping is optimal, meaning that the car is going over bumps and curbs the best that it's going to do. The dampers are absorbing the maximum amount of energy. Any more damping, it would be over damping. Any less, it would be under damped. So once you're optimal, then for setup purposes, the braking, it's up on its tiptoes. It's I don't like the way it feels. I want to make a change to it, or the car's not getting on throttle nicely. Then you can make a change that will cause any change beyond that, especially like if you just add compression and rebound on the back or something like that. Compression to the front and add rebound to the back. Those changes are going to naturally mess with the curve there and skew it left or right. But do you recall any reason why the change happened? Because I feel like it's too early in the setup development to make changes like that. But that you get such good result with such high damper velocities. The damper velocities seem very, very high to me. And I get much better result like lap time and feel with my damper velocities around 33 to 36. But you're in the 40s. Mhm. As you increase your torsion bar diameter, obviously that's stiffening of the suspension. That'll help, and that should bring down the velocities without doing anything else. And then also, I would see. I mean, you still have a little bit of room. I would give maybe 1 or 2 clicks more damping to all the values, and see. That shouldn't change the shape. That shouldn't change the balance of how it behaves in rebound versus compression. But if you just evenly bring up the damping to all of them, just see if you get any better overall grip, because it just seems very high to me, and I get my grip level goes up slightly as I bring down the damper velocities. I think it's still a little bit too high, and if there's anything that we could do, I mean, I'm trying to think of any other way to show, like what I end up doing with the dampers to show is like those energy plots that show the heave motion and the pitch motion of the car, and I try to look at those sometimes to see if this is really going in the right direction to compare two setups. But it's more difficult in this situation because they're also not 100% conclusive. I look at ride height, I look at pitch, I look at heave, and see that one definitely has more heave than the other. But when you're talking about small differences, then lap to lap without changing the setup, you're still going to see that anyway. So it has to be a huge difference for me to be able to 100% tell, yes, this is clearly better. Um, I guess now, yes, more. The more laps you do with it, and the more confident you get, the more you use it. Yeah, so I'm eating like through the S's, both sets of S's. I'm eating up all the curves, and then the oak tree turn I like to get to the curb, but it's also dangerous because I've also hit that tire wall before. So I don't know how wide the car is, and clearly I've hit it more than probably like about 3 times already. And then at the top of the hill in turn 13 or turn 14, I don't hit the curb there because it doesn't like it. Turn, what is it, 16, the last hill there. Yeah, I go over those curves a little bit. So yeah, I guess I'm using a lot of curb. They're pretty hard strikes, yeah. No, because when you're averaging this many laps and everything, the curb strikes are moments that are in the range of 150 to 200 to 200 millimeters per second, but they happen for an instant, and then when you're averaging out, the lap is what, a minute something. How long are our laps right now? We're trying to get into the 40s. Yeah, so like a minute 40 something seconds. Even if you add up like 10 curb strikes, we're talking about a total of maybe 1 second spent out of 4 or 5 minutes at 200 millimeters per second. It doesn't matter to the average. Obviously, majority of the lap or the percentage of the time you're at zero, because that's why you have a center spike, because majority of the time we're spending at 0 millimeters per second. Um, so it's not the curb strikes that, and you would be able to see such a thing. But if you had a disproportionate amount, that's where you would see a little spike or a little bump all the way at the extreme corners of the plot. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it may be the case where I don't know how big of an adjustment. I've never changed the torsion bar, so I don't know how big of an adjustment it is. Where maybe if you go up one on that, if it might automatically take you to overdamp, and then you have to take several clicks off of the damping and to bring it to optimal damping. It may be a big adjustment, and that might be the possibility. But the thing is that we are getting close to the limit. So if you try to slow the damper speeds anymore, you're going to be at the limit, because what's the limit? One or zero? Will it go to zero, or is one click the maximum? I think it might go to zero. Okay, so then you have 2 clicks left for you the way that you have your damping right now, and then you're at the limit. So if you do bring it up and you change the torsion bar OD instantly, that puts you back where you definitely need to maybe take some clicks off. Ideally, that's what it'll do. And if it is the coarser the adjustment is and the bigger the difference is, the more clicks will come off. But it's okay because you're all the way at the upper limit of it. Even if you end up being at 9 and 8, stuff like that, then that's perfectly okay. But yeah, I mean, right now, like a good starting baseline for sure. I noticed that 5 and 6, like I think I was running. I brought them back to like nicer numbers, and then where I ended up now, I guess I'll share screen. It's not good because of the fact that it is doing the damper, the full damper extension thing. But I was doing with this combination. Tell me when you're ready, and you can see. Okay, so basically, you can see that I have 1 click more on the high speed versus the low speed, but the rebound and the compression are symmetric. So 8, 8, and then 1 additional click for the high speed, 9, 9, and then I have 2 clicks more on the rear than on the front, but still with that. And when I started, I was 5 and 6, so I've increased the damping, and I did that, I guess, because of the whole curb thing. So this is the one that I told you that I tested. I'm like, oh, let me just add like 3 or 4 clicks of damping to see if I can increase damping to where this doesn't happen and it doesn't, fully extend. But obviously that didn't help. But the damper velocities are much lower. This was my best lap time anyway. And it felt just fine. So I don't feel like I'm over damping at all. But it definitely seems like a good starting place is always like middle of the road, like around 5 and 6 on the damper number of clicks, and usually you're going to end up having to have more on the rear than on the front, and then also just I don't like. I saw in one of your setups where you had this kind of like backwards, where you had your high speed had one more click than your low speed in compression, but on the rebound it was backwards, where you had a little bit more low speed than high speed, and I don't think it needs to be that way. I think that ends up kind of skewing the graph a little bit. I think like baseline damper setup should always start out kind of like that, where it's one click more on the high speed for this car, and then just 2 clicks more on the rear, and start off like that, and then see where it takes you after that, and then try to fix any other issues that you have with the particular racetrack, and then also obviously the rest of the combination of your setup, your springs, OD, your torsion bar OD, and also and then finally, once you get to optimal damping, what is the car doing when I go to brakes? What is the car doing when I release the brakes? Is there anything else that I need that'll help me go faster? If I need to be able to go to throttle a little bit quicker, but I have understeer, I'm understeering so much when I go to throttle at a certain corner, then you can make that adjustment. I'm having a hard time with that transition off of the brakes. Is there anything I can do with that? Then you can make that adjustment, and then to hell with the graph once it's optimal, and it's balanced, it's symmetric, the damper velocities are where they need to be. But I mean, I haven't done enough testing to prove that 42 is too fast, but it just seems really fast, and I do know at least that being in the mid 30s is working really well, and I brought them down, and I was bringing them down in the car. I picked up a little bit of pace from it. So I don't know. See if there's anything that you can do to bring them down in a safe way that doesn't hurt your setup and your speed. But if at the end of the day you're faster with them at that speed, then make a note of it and just see if at the next racetrack it works the same, and then that means that you found something. Well, that's where you can definitely change the low speed stuff and have way less damping in the low speed, but keep the high speed up, because the high speed, yeah, we're talking about the higher velocities. Our average velocity is above the regime for the low speed damping, because what you're talking about, your feel, like does it feel reactive, or does it feel like a boat? Does it feel the stuff that you can feel is coming straight from the low speed regime, the 0 to 25 millimeters per second. But when it comes to what we're trying to find with optimal damping, we're just trying to find the most amount of grip of keeping that tire contact patch on the road, trying to keep the maximum load on the road. And the thing is that it's really hard on the simulator. You can feel it visually because of the car bouncing. You can feel when it's over damped. You can never feel when it's under damped. There's no way. You cannot feel it. And that's how I always get people like at Mid-Ohio, because Mid-Ohio is incredibly bumpy. It's a really hard track to set up for, and I can kill everybody on the setup usually only with my damping. And I did that with a Cadillac one year, and it's all in the damping, but that's because everybody's under damping the hell out of it. They're bouncing up all over the place. You can't feel it. So they think, oh yeah, I'm happy, the car setup is great. Oh yeah, the balance is wonderful. And you're just missing out on free grip is what it is, because your balance front to rear doesn't change. Like, it's just free grip, where your tires are bouncing up off of the track. You're increasing and decreasing and increasing the load, and then you base your setup and your balance off of that. And I finally reached optimal damping. It was perfect. I did a ton of testing that week, so it was hundreds of laps. And I had world record lap times off of it, where it was like on the top of the chart, not number one, I was like number 3 or 4. And it came just purely from just nobody else at that point knew anything about setting the dampers on the Cadillac. Nobody knew anything. I did a lot of testing, and it's just free grip. But I know for a fact, like, you cannot feel a car being underdamped. So nobody ever knows when you're underdamped. People are always underdamping, and the only problem is then you can go overboard, and there you can feel it. I can feel the car being overdamped by the way that, yeah, it just kind of falls on the car. Gets accelerated up, and then you can see how abruptly it falls. Like the tire is still basically up; it hasn't like rebounded, and like you just have like an impact as you're going over bumps, and that you can kind of visually see. But under damping, you can't tell. So it has to be a thing where you have to look at data to tell that you're optimally damped, or you have to go like an idiot, trial and error, and just go, one click up, do it a lap, another click, another click, another click, until you finally, okay, now I'm over damped, and then you take it back at one click, and then that's it. You know, so that's another key thing is like you'll never know that you're under damped until you go overboard. But the damping also is not a thing of feel. Like it can't be one driver, oh yeah, the damping is perfect for me, and then the other one's like, no, this is over damped. So it has to be the car. That's a car thing. So we need to do more testing because I can't say definitively what's the optimal speed, and it'll change for different racetracks too. I mean, it can't be the same for every circuit, but I'm definitely feeling better and getting better lap times with lower damper velocities.